Hello, this is Jana from Red King, and I thought it's time for a new tutorial. For our game Part 2 that we're working on, I am creating those, I call them interactive game objects right now. And I would love to share my work process, my workflow, how I create those models in Blender and export them to Substance Painter and create the textures there. Yeah, let's get into it. So first Blender, this is how my textures look at the beginning. Those are different game objects that are interactive. Like this is where you could put an artifact, this is a button, this is a respawner for this box, and this is a pressure plate for the dog. And I would choose one of those objects, I guess this one here is cool, and show you how I add moss to them. So let's start. Okay, first what I do with every game object I'm doing, I reset or I apply all the transforms, although it's done already. Let's do it again. The next step is, as you can see, the textures have the meshes have two materials. I need them for baking to tell Substance where I want to add certain materials, like gold, the gold I have. For that I duplicate those meshes and I call it bake. Or to bake. To bake or not to bake. Okay, so, and the hand button, I get rid of the other materials, so I can delete this one here. Because I want to bake just one material in Substance Painter. So the next step is a bit boring. It's the unwrapping. I keep the bottom of the objects always because we have very untidy terrain and it's always better if it has a bottom in case you see it, but otherwise you can delete it, it's not necessary. Okay, this is probably quite long when I unwrap it, so I cut it here too. Okay, and I unwrap it. It looks pretty good. I check if I got any overlapping. No, I don't have. So we can start with that. Alright. So now we add the moss, and for the moss I just copy this one and call it moss. And now I take the hand button and the moss into the sculpting. And now what I do with the moss is I remesh it. I choose 0.01 meters. And now those two meshes are completely overlapping, which is nice, of course. So I choose the standard sculpt draw, leave the strength not too high, make the radius a bit higher, and I press Ctrl to push the mesh back so they are not overlapping like that, so you don't see the moss through everywhere, because you want to decide where the moss goes through. Okay, this doesn't have to be super accurate, it's just... Alright, so what I do next is I bring the moss back up and I make the radius a little bit lower, and then I just draw the moss where I like to have it. In my case, I try to have a bit a more generic look, because you will see those game objects quite often, which is probably also the reason why I do different styles for them, or maybe one hand statue without moss, so you don't see the repetition too much. And yeah, you paint where moss normally grows, like on the upper side of stuff, like here. Just be creative. And also because this is a mesh and not real moss, you have to change the look a bit. So you press Shift to make it softer, so it doesn't have the polys, doesn't show the polys too much, which is a bit difficult with the hands. But yeah, go with Shift over everything, so you don't see the hard edges in this space. Also, it's always cool to check references, you know, to maybe get a bit inspired how moss really grows. I don't tend to get the strength not up too much, because I really bake the normal maps only to this mesh. I don't do a low poly mesh, so I don't want to bring up the moss too much, because yeah, it's just in a normal map and maybe it looks too strange when you don't have the polys lying underneath it. So, and because this is just the beginning and Blender has this nice blob tool, I'm also use that a bit in a moment, which you can find here. And yeah, it's perfect for making little blobs. I feel you have to be careful, like you can see when you bake the normal map, you can really see how you worked here. And when you really draw like little worms, it really doesn't look like mobs. I mean, you can also use like a mask or something, use real moss, but you can also add that in Substance. So I just do a little bit that it's not too flat. Add some. You can also add the moss the way I do it in Substance Painter, but I feel it's better to add it in Blender, because when I change the geometry, it's easier to bake and change that in Blender with the moss than it would be in Substance Painter. But it's up to you. Okay, I think I'm happy with this. And now, yeah, saving. You go back to modeling. And what I do first is I export the UV unwrapped yellow poly mesh. I make my own folder for every object because of the amount of textures. It's always a bit nicer. Call that hand button. Here, selected objects only, apply transform, and here we go. All right, so we get this, but we also want to have the high poly mesh. And for that, I take those two, I duplicate them, and I call them both combined. So, and I export that too. I'm calling my high poly meshes always the same name and HP. So, all right, let's go to Substance Painter. There I do new file, and because we work with Unity, I'm using I'm using the metallic standard. I render it in 2048, although I exported only with 1024, 1K, just in case I need it, because I kind of see, I don't like the edges, it feels a bit pixelated, so maybe a bigger size is better. Alright, then I go to hand button, select my low poly, and you don't need to change anything. UV tile workflow, everything else is set. Okay, we don't need to see the UV. So I changed it to 3 only. Yeah, and the first thing we do is bake the meshes that you need to generate textures in Substance Painter. I also generate them in 2048. We add the hand button HP in the high definition meshes. I apply the fusion, and I basically leave everything to be. Maybe this a bit because it's probably a bit overlapping. The high poly meshes over the low poly, and then I click bake mesh. Okay, looks good. So what I do next, I prepared a smart material. I just dragged that in. I show you how to do it later, and just explain which kind of materials I added. So I'm using my assets. Nope. Project. And here are my materials. Okay, so that's not right. But first I go through with you through all the materials. Okay, we can delete the first layer. I hide all of them. And we are starting. So my first layer of texture is actually a stone. And for that I have different, several layers. Also that one we don't need. A basic layer. Oh. Okay, a basic layer like with a bluish color. Then I add more colors with patches. And I do this by adding a new fill layer. Mostly I put out all the different material or textures, except color. I only add what I need. Then choose a color that is close to the color I want to have. And then I add a black mask, so you don't see the new patch. And then I add fill to this black mask, and I want it to be filled with cell. It does make those nice patches that you see here. Or maybe I do a different color so you see better what this kind of texture is going for. So it really builds those cells. And of course that doesn't look like stone, so I add another effect to these, or filter to the mask, and that is blur slope. And maybe make it more intense. I'm going for a more stylized look, so that's also why I use those cells. It's really building this nice stylized look. And it blurs the patches a bit, but not too much, so you still see like, it feels a bit like a drawn with chalk or with some paint, like roughly drawn. That's like the look I want to go for. I don't do this photorealistic look now. Alright, so we change the color back to something more blue. And if you add for example, you want to have another roughness like your basic color is, you can add roughness and can, you know, change that a bit so it's changing for the color you just added. Okay, but I delete this now. And this I did several times with different layers, different colors. Sometimes more blue, sometimes more gray. Also, you can scroll up and in the cell, of course, change the cell by changing the scale a bit, or rotation. Yeah, so, or the offset. So you don't have the same cells in the same space. So I build up variants here, build more. And the next layer is ambient occlusion. I do this with a more darker color. So I added a bit of roughness and metallic. Give it a new mask, a black mask, add black mask. And yeah, add the ambient occlusion. Okay, I delete so I can show you how I did it. Okay, so first you have a fill layer. Or better, you add a generator. And there you can choose ambient occlusion. Okay, and I add curvature for that. Delete it. Again, you want to emphasize on the edges now, and for that I use curvature, so I use a lighter color. Okay, let me just delete this. So I add a fill layer. I get rid of all this stuff because I need it right now. It's a lighter color, I can keep that. I add a black mask, and into a black mask I add the generator. And the generator is curvature. In generator, in general, you find always textures that are generated from the textures we just rendered in the beginning. So I choose curvature. And also exchange it a bit. And what I always do, like I take a lighter color and then I change this to soft light. So it's not that strong, depending on what effect you want. And maybe I even change that a bit. Yeah, let's look into that again. Alright, so, and the last layer in those walls, it's like a bit like fake moss that I already add to the stone, and those structures here. And I did it the same as the other stuff before. I add a color, I add a black mask, and in that black mask I add dirt. And also this time I added some height, that's why you see the cells this time. And yeah, I keep roughness, and I think normal is not really needed. I just leave it on for the normal map baking later on. Alright, so that's the main texture of the statue. And the next layer is the gold. And the gold is in the wrong place. Sometimes when I edit, it's just really in the right place. This time it's not, which means that the color ID is not right. So the gold I just added is mod material from Substance Painter, and I add a black mask to it, and then I want to choose where it's supposed to be, and that you can do with the color selection. So for color selection you can go into the black mask and say add color selection. So you can really choose which, for me it's like really, I did it before in Blender, like in the light blue spaces I want the gold later on. So you pick a color, and the problem is it didn't really render my color selection right. I don't know why. Most of the time it's doing perfect work, this time it doesn't. So, but we can help ourselves easily, and that is in Blender. So in Blender I render my own IDs if something goes wrong, like this time, and it's cool that it goes wrong, so I can show you. This is my last map I rendered, and for that I go to the shading tab, select my two textures. In this case it's the hand button, like the low poly object and the high poly object that combine both. And what I want to do is just render those colors onto into the UV map, so I can, or not UV map, like the texture, so I can import it to Substance Painter. Okay, so for the rendering, we go to shading and create a new texture. I call that head button color ID. I choose, I just leave it to that. I don't choose alpha because I don't have it, and say okay. So in the hand button I already added, normally you see it like that. I delete it. With Shift A you can add new textures. I search for image texture, and I add the texture I just created, and that would be head color ID. And you can just leave the space to everything. We don't connect it, it's really just we select it and Blender just knows what to do with it. Right, so then I select my object and the object I want to render, or vice versa. Because in the end you want to see this texture you just created, and select it in case. And then you go to the right tab to render properties. And there you can render to texture. That's what we're doing. So I choose cycles. I also choose GPU compute. You can leave most stuff to it. The only thing I choose is I want to have the bake type. It's diffuse because we just want to have the colors. And normally you will find this field like this, but we don't want any lighting or indirect lighting. We just want color because we want this clean image. You don't need to have a cage, maybe a bit extrusion, but that's everything you need. That's it. That's all I add to this, and then we can say bake. Okay, when it's finished, it should look like this. Also represented in this window. What you have to do is you have to save the image because it's not saved automatically. So press Save As. And I put it in my folder and it's called Hand Button Color ID. You can leave everything like it is, PNG, RGB, 8-bit color depth, everything like that. Save the image. So now we go to Substance, and there on the left side down there's this little plus, and you can add a resource. Add button color ID. I define it as texture for us to find it better. I always leave it in the current session and I say import. Okay, now it's here. You can put it into the field of the ID mask. And now our gold should have the right color if we pick it like that, and only this is gold that is colored gold and we want to be colored gold. Yeah, normally Substance Painter perfectly bakes those, yeah, but we just did in Blender. Sometimes it doesn't work, I don't know why, but this is how you can help yourself. Then we have the moss. It's also I do the moss the same way. I adjust the stone, so I have a base moss color. It's green, of course. I add roughness. It's not metallic, and I keep the height and the normal out in this base. Then I add some additional maps, and again with cell and the blur slope added to it, and another color, I get this look. And I did one last, I call it pointy map. It's also a curvature, so like the most upper bubbles of the moss are colored a little bit lighter. Maybe not too much, like this. And if you want, if this is not your style, of course you can always add, like I tried it, but it's too much for me. I added a normal map, and I always, when I paint my own texture and want to have a normal map for that later, I put it in my own fill layer. So I do a fill layer only with normal map, and then I add a normal map because it's easier to work with. But it's too much for me, so I hide it or cut it out, can delete it. Yeah, and as I said, the moss, also the black mask gets a color selection, and we put our color in the ID mask, and it recognized it from before because the smart materials really remember your colors you chose. All right. Then there's a last layer I add. It's a dirt layer with a darker color to really make like very dark moss in places, but it's a bit too much in this place, so I edit here a bit less, like this. And for us, for Unity, because I want when the player moves near those moving objects, I want the golden layers to become maybe white, maybe blue, like flashing light, so people see that it's activated and functional and that they can use this object. For that, I added another layer. I make it, it's white. I just created new. Remove layer, so I make a new layer. Cut everything out except the color, and the color is really white because it's also just a mask, because in Unity we probably make it like a bit like a light blue or something. And I give it a mask, and the mask gets a color selection, and the color selection is also, I have to add. Okay, so basically what I do to get a different channel for this white color here, I add an emissive channel here. In the normal HD render pipeline metallic standard workflow, it's not integrated, but you can simply add it. I go on this window, texture set settings, or on the button, click here. And here you can add more channels if you like. And I add the emissive channel, and it's writing to sRGB, which is cool. Yeah, leave it just like it is. And I just press emit. Okay, not color, but instead white. Alright. So when I export the textures with that move, it doesn't override my gold channel like it would do if it would be a single texture, but it's now in the emissive color, and in the end in Unity it will also be the emissive mask, so that's totally fitting. Okay, so leave that on. And then I go to File, Export Textures, and I look for my folder and button, and if your output template is not the same, just look it up here. For me it's HD render pipeline metallic standard. PNG I choose JPEG because it's for our game, and also I choose 1044 1K, but probably a bit higher is better because, like I said, it looks a bit pixelated, which I don't like. Yeah, and then you can check your output material channels. So it's albedo map, it's the mask map you need for metals, it's normal, and it's the emissive map. Alright, so everything's in order. You can just press export. Okay, and then let's check the materials. So here is my hand button map, my mask for the emissive, my metal mask, and the normal map. So I'm often directly putting them into Unity to check if the materials are alright. So I open my Meshes and Materials folder. And I just copy the hand button and all the other objects over there. And just build a little, okay, it's importing, where's the hand button, it's here. And I make a new material. You can leave everything like that. I just check the emission because I will need it later. And of course name it properly to hand button. Alright, so the albedo, the emission, you don't see it yet because we use it via code, the metal map, and of course the normal map. It's always broken, but you can press fix and it's fine. Yeah, and that's how it looks. And your map is finished. Alright, that's my workflow. There might be some easier ways, like I said, like probably adding this in Substance, but I tend to not paint in Substance because it's often you can't reuse it because, like I said, it's a smart material. I have more like of these objects, and if you have like a workflow, like with more than one object, it's always easier if at least in one program you can just drag and drop, yeah, for example, the smart material. In order to get it, you put everything of those layers into a new folder. Just press add group and name that probably. In my case, I called it stylized interactive ruin object. And then right click, create smart material, and it will be added to all the smart materials in the library. And with the next object, you can just, here that was one. With the next object, you can just add it to your object. And even if the color ID went right, it will be perfectly textured and doesn't require any more rework. So yeah, that's really cool. I like it. But if you have an easier workflow, tell me about it. I'm always happy for input from outside. If not, I'm happy if you learned something new. Yeah, that's it from me. Yeah, thanks for watching. Have a great day.